Pete Carroll, the legendary coach who built dynasties in Seattle, just sat down and tried to explain why the Raiders passed on Shedeur Sanders. Not once, not twice, 5 separate times in the draft. 5 times.
What were your impressions of Shedeur Sanders during the draft process?
That's a good question because we visited with him and I talked to him a little extra and was just trying to understand where he's coming from and realizing that he'd been under enormous pressure growing up, and all that, just naturally with the pops that he had and all that. And I'm just curious how he's handled it and dealt with it. He's got a really good outlook on the world and how he deals with all of the stressors and all of the things that comes his way. I really liked him. He's a piano player, he had well-versed, and I was impressed with the kid.
If you was that impressed, I don't believe you would have passed on him 5 times, but at least you're not spewing BS nonsense rumors.
5 opportunities to grab a quarterback who was supposed to be a first-round talent, who had the connections, who had Tom Brady in his corner, and the Raiders said no thanks every single time. And now Pete Carroll wants us to believe he was impressed with the kid? Something doesn't add up here, and we need to talk about it. The NFL draft is brutal. It's a meat market where dreams die and legends are born in the span of 3 days. And Shedeur Sanders, the son of primetime himself, was supposed to be a lock for Vegas.
The Raiders would draft Shedeur Sanders. Not only did they not draft Shedeur, they passed on Shedeur Sanders 5 separate times in the draft. They had multiple picks in the 3rd round, all types of stuff. They didn't want Shedeur Sanders, even with the relationship Shedeur has with Tom Brady.
The narrative wrote itself. Tom Brady, minority owner of the Raiders, had a relationship with Shedeur. Pete Carroll, desperate for a franchise quarterback, had every reason to take a swing. The pieces were there. The storyline was perfect. But they passed. Again and again and again.
I really liked him. He's a piano player. He had well-versed, and I was impressed with the kid.
Impressed. That's the word Pete Carroll used. Impressed. You know what you do when you're impressed with a quarterback in today's NFL? You draft him. You don't let him slip to the 5th round. You don't watch him go to Cleveland as a backup to Gabriel. You pull the trigger because franchise quarterbacks don't grow on trees. Instead, Carroll decided to ride with Geno Smith. Geno Smith, who's currently leading the league in interceptions. Geno Smith, who's throwing picks like he's trying to set a record. Geno Smith, who's making defensive coordinators across the NFL look like geniuses every single Sunday.
When you pursue Geno Smith, it's bad. The Raiders gave up a 3rd-round pick and paid him $66 million guaranteed. They over-pursued Geno Smith, who once again leads the NFL in picks. And right now, he's arguably the worst quarterback in the league. So it's one thing to settle at quarterback.
This is the hill Pete Carroll chose to die on. This is the decision that might define the final chapter of his coaching legacy. Because let's be real here. The Raiders are spiraling. They're not competing for a playoff spot. They're competing for draft position. And all the while, Shedeur Sanders is sitting in Cleveland, waiting for his moment, preparing for his shot to prove every single team that passed on him wrong. The elephant in the room is this. Why didn't NFL teams love Shedeur Sanders? He fell to the 5th round. That's not a slight miscalculation by 1 or 2 teams. That's 32 franchises looking at him and deciding he wasn't worth a 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th round pick. That's a collective judgment from the entire league that something was off, that something didn't fit what they were looking for.
People that are Shedeur fans, and I'm one, I thought he should have been the first quarterback taken in this draft. But we have to accept the NFL teams don't like him. I don't mean personally, but every single team passed on him multiple times. And we've seen guys that could be distractions, guys that, maybe people didn't like their personality or whatever. And if they're talented, teams pick them.
There it is. The media circus, the Deion Factor, the pressure that comes with being the son of one of the most charismatic, controversial, and captivating figures in football history. Teams didn't just evaluate Shedeur as a quarterback, they evaluated him as a package deal. And for many franchises, that package came with too much baggage, too much attention, too much risk for a mid to late round pick who might never see the field. You don't let concerns about media noise override your evaluation of talent. You make the call, you take the risk. The Raiders didn't, and now they're paying for it. Geno Smith is throwing interceptions at an alarming rate. The offense is stagnant, the season is lost, And somewhere in Cleveland, Shedeur Sanders is preparing for the biggest audition of his life this Sunday against the very team that refused to draft him. The irony is almost too perfect. This game matters. It matters for Shedeur's career, it matters for the Browns' future, and it matters as a referendum on every team that passed on him. Because if Shedeur comes out and lights up that Raiders defense, if he shows poise, accuracy, and command of the offense, every single franchise is going to have to answer uncomfortable questions, Pete Carroll included.
Okay, let's just start there. If he's excellent, then he's set up incredibly well. Like, he will get more starts, I believe, this year, and will be, will have the opportunity to prove he should be in the mix to be the Browns starting quarterback.
Excellence. That's the standard Shedeur needs to hit. Not good, not decent, excellent. Because anything less and the narrative shifts. Anything less and teams will point to this game as validation for why they passed on him. Anything less and Shedeur might not get another chance. That's the cruel reality of being a fifth-round pick with a famous last name. The leash is shorter, the expectations are higher, the margin for error doesn't exist. Deion Gabriel can throw picks and miss throws and struggle for weeks on end, and he still gets the benefit of the doubt because he was the starter. But Shedeur gets one game, one shot, one opportunity to change the entire trajectory of his career. The pressure is suffocating, but if there's one thing we know about the Sanders family, it's that they thrive under pressure. They embrace the spotlight. They perform when the stakes are highest. And make no mistake, the stakes couldn't be higher this Sunday. Let's talk about what Pete Carroll is really saying when he talks about being impressed with Shedeur. He's saying the kid of maturity. He's saying Shedeur handled the pre-draft process well, that he understands the pressure that comes with being Deion's son, that he's got a good head on his shoulders. All that sounds great. All that sounds like exactly what you want in a franchise quarterback, but none of it was enough to actually draft him.
I know Dylan well, and Shedeur has had a tremendous background of success and all. I know he struggled a little bit the other day, but we've got to know because they're really different players.
That disconnect is what makes this entire situation so fascinating. Pete Carroll can praise Shedeur all he wants now. He can talk about being impressed, about liking his outlook, about seeing potential, but actions speak louder than words. And the Raiders' actions said they didn't want him, not even as a backup, not even as a developmental project. They took multiple players instead, none of whom are generating the buzz or potential that Shedeur brings to the table.
It would be one thing if the Rams drafted him and Shedeur Sanders was sitting behind Matthew Stafford. Nobody would be saying, oh, Shedeur needs to be in the game. No, nobody would be saying any of that. We would be saying, hey, he's behind a Hall of Famer, a Super Bowl champion, who's a great quarterback. He needs to sit and learn and soak up as much game as he can.
If Shedeur was backing up Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, nobody would be clamoring for him to play. We'd all understand he's learning behind greatness, developing his game, waiting for his moment. But Deion Gabriel isn't greatness. He's a struggling quarterback on a struggling team, and watching him miss throws while Shedeur sits on the bench drives fans crazy. The Browns are in an impossible situation. They invested draft capital in Gabriel. They named him the starter. They built their offense around him, but he's not delivering. And now they have to decide, do we stick with the plan and hope Gabriel figures it out, or do we give Shedeur extended playing time and see what we actually have? This Sunday gives us a glimpse of the answer. And for Pete Carroll and the Raiders, it's going to be a painful reminder of what could have been. Because if Shedeur balls out, if he shows command and poise and playmaking ability, the question becomes unavoidable. Why did you pass on him 5 times? Carroll can talk about being impressed all he wants. He can praise Shedeur's maturity and outlook in piano playing, but none of that changes the fact that when it mattered, when he had the chance to actually draft him, he said no. And now, Geno Smith is throwing the receptions at a historic rate while Shedeur prepares to torch that same defense. The NFL is a league of what-ifs and could-have-beens. Quarterbacks get drafted too early and bust. Gems slip through the cracks and become Hall of Famers. Teams make decisions they regret for decades. This could be one of those moments. This could be the draft decision that haunts the Raiders for the next 15 years. Or maybe Shedeur struggles on Sunday. Maybe he shows why teams passed on him. Maybe the concerns were valid and the evaluation was correct. We'll find out soon enough. But here's what we know right now. Pete Carroll had 5 chances to draft Shedeur Sanders. 5 opportunities to bring him to Las Vegas, to develop him, to potentially solve the Raiders' quarterback problem for the next decade. And 5 times, he said no. That's not impressive. That's not smart evaluation. That's a missed opportunity. And in the NFL, missed opportunities have a way of haunting you. This Sunday, Shedeur Sanders gets his shot against the team that didn't want him, against the defense that's been getting torched all season, against the franchise that chose Geno Smith's interceptions over his potential. The stage is set. The narrative writes itself, and Pete Carroll will be watching from the sidelines, wondering if he just made the biggest mistake of his coaching career. Because if Shedeur Sanders is who many believe he can be, if he lives up to the potential and the pedigree and the preparation, then every team that passed on him is going to have to answer for it. And Pete Carroll's praise about being impressed is going to ring hollow against the reality of what he could have had. Pete Carroll can be impressed all he wants, but impressive is getting results. Impressive is making the right call when it counts. Impressive is having the guts to take the player you believe in, media circus and all. The Raiders didn't do that, and now they get to watch what they passed on tear apart their defense on national television. Game on.